Are you ready to get unstuck from your repetitive daily routine, tap into your mind and body's internal cues, and just discover the things in this world that will lead you to your life's greatest potential? Me too. I'm glad you're here today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Greatest Potench podcast. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to be discussing a topic that is very, very relevant to every single one of your lives, and that is the addiction that our society has to technology and to our phones and to social media. Now, I do want to give a disclaimer before I get too deep into this episode that the vibes and the overall message of this episode might be a little bit darker and deeper than previous episodes just because of the nature of the topic. I don't mean to scare you away. I don't mean to make you depressed or nervous or just negative about everything, but just because of the way that this topic expresses itself in our lives, it might feel a little bit different. It might not feel as lighthearted or as funny or things like that. But just wanted to give that disclaimer before we got into it so that you knew what to expect out of today's episode. But with that being said, I wanted to start off this episode by having you imagine a scenario and just put yourself in the context of like the mid to late 2000s. You're in elementary or middle school and you're having just your normal typical day. Now, if that wasn't your age group around this time, that's totally okay, but just kind of put yourself in that general scenario. Put yourself in that timeline and that stage of your life if you possibly can. So you wake up in the morning, the windows are open. You can hear the sounds of nature and just birds, and you can hear the frogs and the bugs and the trees blowing outside. Open your eyes, you see your curtains swaying on the side of your windows, and you smell breakfast cooking downstairs. So you get really excited. It smells like pancakes. So you hurry up, get dressed, put on your clothes, maybe brush your hair, maybe get a little bit ready, and you run downstairs to start eating breakfast. And you hear the radio in the kitchen just playing some music. You hear the hosts talking about the daily news, the daily traffic, things going on. And your siblings are just getting out of bed too. Your parents are heading off to work or they're making breakfast in the kitchen. And then before you know it, it's time to go get ready for school. So you grab your backpack, put on your shoes, run out to the bus stop, and hop on the bus. And when you're there, you find your best friend, you sit in your seats that you always tend to go to, and you play a little hand game. You play some brick wall, waterfall, girl, you think you got it all. You're playing chopsticks with your fingers, just entertaining yourself like kids do. You get off the bus, you get to school, starting off the day slow. You walk into your classroom and there's coloring pages out. Everyone's just kind of coloring, getting ready for the day. And before you know it, you go throughout your day, you're learning about your math, your science, your history. You go to the library for a little bit with your class, just looking through the shelves, picking out books. Maybe the librarian will read you a story while you're in there. You go out to recess with your friends. You pick up on your 3-week-long game of the witch and princess saga that you've made up completely in your heads. That has been ongoing now since the beginning of school. You maybe run around the playground for a while, go swing on the swings, kick around a kickball, maybe go hang out under the trees if it's a super hot day. And then the school day's over, and grab your backpack again, wrap everything up, get back on the bus, and you walk home. Maybe you go run over to the friend's house for a little bit before your parents get home from work. Maybe you're running around the neighborhood, playing outside. Maybe you have to go home and work on a little bit of homework. And once you get that done, you just go out to the backyard and you're jumping on the trampoline and playing on the swing set. And then it's 5 p.m. and you have gymnastics practice to go to. So your parents load you up into the car, they drop you off at practice, you're there for a couple hours, and then at the end of the day, they pick you up again, you come home, have your nice dinner, get your bath or your shower. You go upstairs, lay down in your bed again, maybe you grab a book or a magazine. And you cuddle up with your stuffed animals, you close your eyes and get ready to do it all the next day. So this is what life looks like, I imagine, for most of us in the mid to late 2000s. We have our school day, we have our routine, and if you notice in the story, I did not mention once you grab for your smartphone, or you grab for your tablet, or you check your social media, or you open your phone to find a few texts. That wasn't a part of the story back then. Back then, the things that we were concerned about were, like I said, at recess, picking back up on your 3-week-long storyline that you've been playing with your friends at recess, or going outside and running around the neighborhood playing tag and hoping that you don't have to be it first. And yes, these are things that happen in childhood and naturally start fading a little bit as we grow up, but adults still did very similar things. You would get off work, come home, and rather than scrolling on your phone for hours at a time, you would maybe do some chores around the house. Maybe you would spend some time with your significant other and play a game. Maybe you would flip on the TV, listen to the news, watch a couple shows, but the focus of your evening wasn't the shows. It wasn't the TV. The focus was the people that you were around and your family. So I fear, and I hate to admit this, but I think we all know it, so we'll just rip the Band-Aid right off. We have become, as a society and as a world and as humans, addicted to technology. And that is not our fault, but that is the reality that we live in. We are actually addicted to technology. And part of the reason I wanted to cover this episode today is because I had a little bit of a rude awakening in terms of my own technology addiction recently. So I was on my way to dance practice, or it was either right before or right after, and my friends and I were in the car talking about our screen time trends because this week I was just so lazy and so exhausted, and I swear there was one of the days this week where I was just glued to my phone. So we all opened up our screen time and settings, and I was shook to my core when I found out the number of hours that I'd spent on my phone that week, and then specifically that one day I felt like I was stuck on there, the amount of hours I spent that day on my phone. It was terrifying, and I'm going to give you the number in just a second, but before that, I'm going to give you a metric that I saw on a Reddit post that freaked me out and really put all this into perspective for me. So after I'd seen my jarring screen time number, I go on Reddit and I'm just looking up keywords like internet addiction or social media addiction or screen time and things like that. I was trying to just find what other people were experiencing, see if other people had gone through the same thing that I did, which I know now that that is a fact, that many, many people are having the same situation, but I was just curious. I felt really bad about myself after seeing my number, and I wanted to see what other people were going through. So this Reddit post was trying to just educate us on how much time we really, really do spend on our phones and on social media. The post says that if you spend even just 3 hours a day on your phone or on social media or whatever capacity that looks like, 3 hours of screen time a day, that over the course of 1 year equals 42 days, which if they put it in a percentage of how much of the year that was 12% of the entire year that was spent looking at a screen, specifically looking at your smartphone. And that number freaked me out. Like 3 hours a day, you're like, oh, that's nothing. That's really not that big of a deal. But then you hear the 42 days number, and then you hear 12% of the entire year was spent on the phone. It's scary. So, in full transparency, when I was having that conversation with my friends about our screen time, when I opened my app, I saw that my average time on my phone per day for the past month, because you can like switch back to, I think, 4 weeks in the past to see. My trend was 7 hours a day. That is more than double what that Reddit post said. So based on the metrics of that, even if I had doubled that, that's like 84 days. That's 25% of my year with my current trends that I would spend on my phone in front of the screen. A quarter of my entire year, 80 days of my year would be spent staring at a phone screen, not interacting with a human. And maybe I am interacting with a human, but we'll get there. But that number was so jarring and so awakening to me that I literally had like an existential crisis right then and there. It was the middle of the workday when I was scrolling on Reddit. It was like during when I was in a break between stores and I had a little bit of downtime. So I went on my phone, went on Reddit, was scrolling. I was so stressed for the rest of the day. I was like, okay, so we're not going to be getting the phone out at all for the rest of this workday. And I was really productive. I will say I had a very productive second half of the day after seeing this metric because I was just so shocked and scared and awakened to the reality of how much I spend on my phone. And I don't even think I'm one of the worst people. Yeah, 7 hours is really bad. I know my friend, when she pulled hers up, it was like 4 hours. And even that to me sounded like a lot. So when I saw my own, I was clearly very shocked. But there's people that I know spend even more time than that. Because if you know anything about me, you know I'm pretty active in dance. You know I work a 9 to 5. I am fairly social and just very busy with the things I do in my life. So the fact that I even accumulate 7 hours a day was astonishing to me, but it's also so concerning. I almost spend an entire working day's worth of hours on my phone in some capacity, which is unbelievable. And so when you're in the screen time, if you have the iPhone, I don't know for other phone brands or things like that, but I imagine you would have a similar thing that you can look at. But in the iPhone, there's these little trends that you can see for like your pickup patterns or how long you spend in certain apps. And granted, when I looked at my pickup patterns, most of my pickups were to open the Messages app, which means I'm just texting people a lot or trying to communicate via text often, which is not as bad as like sitting there scrolling on social media. But my social media numbers weren't great either, so just going to be completely transparent there. Most of my pickups, and what I mean by pickups is when you grab your phone, what is the first thing you go to? So for mine, it was the Messages app, but for second place, it was Instagram. So that case in point right there. So given that context, I thought it would be really, really important this week, and this is something I wanted to talk about regardless, but especially in light of finding out this jarring information about my own trends, I thought it would be really important to kind of just cover this topic and discuss it because it's a real issue. And I think that we're so comfortable and so used to it that we forget how different life used to be before, which is why I opened the episode with that example because it truly looks and feels so different now. But point aside, I do in this episode want to try to be authentic and real and not researched. Obviously, I pulled in that information from that Reddit post about like how much time accumulates throughout the year that we spend on our phone. But I really, for the sake of the topic, want to try and just speak authentically from my brain as a human because I feel like that's the one thing that smartphones and technology are driving us away from is just being authentic and being unprepared and unresearched and not scripted. I feel like we often feel like we need to paint ourselves a certain way or do things the correct way to come across the way we want to be seen on the internet, and I want to try not to do that. So I'm going to share with you some key years and timelines in terms of like the evolution of technology. But really aside from that, I'm not going to be pulling up a lot of research or metrics or things like that because I just want to be authentic and have a conversation. So in preparation for this episode, like I said, I didn't want to go in like too researched, but I did want to just, for my own curiosity, figure out the timelines of when all of this technology and internet stuff started happening because I feel like it's almost been exponentially developing. Like, I feel like I remember when I had just a big old dinosaur computer on the desk and was playing like CD-ROM video games, but I also was a toddler back then, and now I feel like even just in my mid-20s, it's a completely different world of technology, and that's even just been in my own lifetime. So I was just curious on like what the actual timeline is for all of these technological developments and advancements and things. So I have a couple dates that I'm going to throw at you and the associated, I guess, technological advancement that came in that date. So, in 1971, the first household computer was released or invented. So, 1971, you could actually have your own personal computer in your house. In 1979, dial-up internet was invented. So, now that you have these computers in your house, you could also access the internet through dial-up, and many of my listeners probably weren't around for that because I don't even think I was. Well, obviously I wasn't in 1979. But, you know, the whole classic buzzing and ringing that sometimes plays, like that sound effect that we hear, that was the sound of dial-up internet, if you've ever heard that. So, in 1981, the first personal laptop was released. And they weren't quite mainstream yet by 1981, but this is when the first actual personal laptop device was available to buy. In 1988, online instant messaging became a thing. So if you think of like AIM or something, again, this was before my time, so I don't completely know all the instant messaging things, but this was kind of an online way to chat with your friends. Think of it as like DMing or texting for us now, but it was like over the internet, so you could really talk to anyone. Very, very fun, I imagine, in the time. So then in 1997, household Wi-Fi and social media kind of simultaneously first launched. So rather than the dial-up, you could actually have your own Wi-Fi server at your home. So you could access your own personal source of internet rather than having to dial in to access the internet. And I found out simultaneously the first technical social media website was released. I don't remember the exact name of the platform because I didn't feel like it was super relevant, didn't write it down, but it's interesting that gaining access to Wi-Fi and gaining access to social media both happened in the same year. Thought that was pretty cool. So then, in 2001, we've kind of been on the computer train here, but we're going to switch over to the smartphone train now. In 2001, the first smartphone began to gain access to the internet. And by smartphone, I just mean a phone that has capabilities to do internet things, is all I mean by that. So 2001 was the first internet-connected phone. And then, most recently in this timeline that I pulled, in 2010, phones could produce their own hotspot. So think of this as like cellular data, you know how you pay for your data package. In 2010, you could share that given data with people. You could create your own Wi-Fi. So when you're out in public, people can, connect to your own produced Wi-Fi signal. And those are all my checkpoints because I was like, well, things must have happened since 2010, I'm sure, that are important developments. But really, like, the creation of the internet, the introduction of phones gaining access to the internet, like, I remember that. And maybe I don't remember in 2001 because I was literally a 1 and 2 year old in that year, but I do remember, like, when it started becoming more commonplace and people would be able to access the internet or, like, websites on their phone, I remember was a big thing. And then I remember the whole data situation. Like, I remember when my mom first decided to get data, because we'd had Wi-Fi for the longest time, but you can't really use any of your apps or do any of your online stuff when you're out and about without a Wi-Fi connection or without data. So, like, I personally remember in my own life when we finally decided to get the data plan, and it was a big deal, and we had like 5 gigs only per month, which at the time was enough because we weren't used to needing to access the internet when we were away from home. We weren't used to all of the desperate reliance on the technology that we have today. So, like, unlimited data, it was a thing, but it was so expensive, and not a lot of people had it because we didn't really need it like we do now. So, just wanted to bring up that timeline because it's really interesting. The timeline stretches from 1971 to 2010. Like, that's 40 years. And now, we look at the change from 2010 to 2020 even, that's 10 years. And we have probably about double, if not triple, if not even like quintuple the amount of developments than I mentioned in this timeline. And that was a 40-year timeline versus a 10-year timeline. Like, just think about that in perspective. We have done so much so quickly with technology. And like any evolutionary things, right? Humans need time to adapt and adjust to changes in our environment. And I feel like with this technology, it's just boomed so quickly. And I don't know anything about biology or science in terms of humans evolving, but I feel like there's no way that we were meant to adapt to this big lifestyle change so quickly, but we've been forced to. And it's not against our will because we actually enjoy it. Like, every time a new iPhone releases, we're always the ones in line to get it, or we're pre-ordering, or there's a new data plan and there's all these advertisements about, oh, access your phone anytime, anywhere, always. And we love it. Like, we feed into that stuff. We're not as hesitant to get into it, right? So it's really interesting. And as I think about how humans respond to this social media and this internet addiction and this phone addiction, it's honestly really sad because I'm constantly brought back to these mid to late 2000s, right? When these things had been invented, right? Like 2010, I said, was the most recent landmark on that list of dates I gave. And that was when phones could produce their own hotspot. But really, social media had already been around at this point. Maybe it wasn't in the form of phone apps, but we were already using it. Like, social media isn't the problem. Phones having access to the internet aren't the problem. But I think the speed at which it's happened and the lack of ability to know how to respond to it as a human is the main issue. So really, again, to put yourself in a certain scenario, can you think of the last time you were genuinely bored? And when I say bored, I mean like when you're laying around on the couch, you don't have any commitments to do, you don't have anywhere to be, and you genuinely don't know what to do. Like, your brain is empty, your body is just doing nothing, and you're sitting there and you genuinely don't know what to do. You can't think of anything, you don't know what you want to do, there's nothing pressing or there's nothing calling your attention. When was the last time you were actually bored? When your mind was actually empty and you didn't know what to do? Because for me, when I think about that, I would say, probably like a week ago when I didn't know what to do, so I just scrolled on TikTok for 2 hours. No, that's different. That's scrolling on TikTok for 2 hours. You're doing something. You're occupying your brain. You're not bored. You're doing something. Your brain is distracted. Your mind is focused on a task, even if it's a bunch of mini tasks, one after the other, and you're scrolling through them. But your brain is still focused on something. You're still doing an activity. It just doesn't feel like it because we all know that TikTok isn't super productive. But if you ask me to answer this question the way I framed it, I don't know when the last time I was actually bored was. And I think if I'm going to be completely honest, it was probably on a long car drive when I was a passenger in the back seat, like on a family trip or something, and I lost service. Because we don't know how to act. We don't know what to do when we lose service anymore. We don't know what to do when we can't pull up our social media, or when we can't scroll on TikTok, or when we can't contact our friends for even like an hour. Like, it makes us nervous. Like, we almost have a fight or flight response when we can't do those things. And like I said, that's because through our behaviors and through just the way that society has evolved, I genuinely think that we have an addiction to this stuff, to these phones, to the social media. And I alluded to this earlier, but it's not even our fault. We are totally victims of these social media companies and these tech companies knowing exactly how to keep us glued to our phones. And it didn't start like this, right? Like, if you think about it, I remember when Instagram launched. I believe I was in middle school, and like they prompted you to make a profile, but at the time it wasn't Instagram the way that we know it now. It was literally just a square-shaped photo. There was like 8 to 10 filters that you could choose from, and then you just posted it. And it wasn't this whole pressure to like have followers or anything like that. It was really more, I just want to take a photo and I want to make it look cool and I want to share it on this page where there's a collection of all the different photos I've edited. And if you were to show 12-year-old me that Instagram would be how it is today, I would have laughed and been like, oh, I'm not getting this. That's crazy. Because we weren't used to that kind of stuff back then. We weren't used to just the constant stimuli and the influencers and the ads and the strategic algorithms that all these apps have developed over time and put in place to just keep us scrolling. Because all of these social media apps and all of these big tech companies make more money when we use more of their stuff. So if we are stuck in a zombie trance scrolling on Instagram, they make money for that. Everyone at Instagram makes money for our addiction, for our habit. So throughout all these developments, and like I said, over the course of probably the past 10 years, there's been just an outpouring of developments and changes and AI and just learnings that we have from these apps that are strategically curated to keep us addicted. So it's not our fault, but these companies know our human weaknesses. It's so interesting because the human brain is so complex. But what we know about it is it loves routine and it loves instant gratification. And I know one thing about social media is it is the definition of instant gratification, right? Especially with these algorithms, because these apps know exactly what we want to see. They know what we want to hear. They know what we want to scroll, and they know what we'll get stuck doing because we give them that information. We like things, we comment on things, we save things, and they realize our trends. And as much as they want to say they're not using your data against you, they absolutely are. They make money off of that. And so I think of times when I spend on TikTok, which I really, really want to change this, but when I'll be scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and I think it's after an hour, which is so embarrassing to say that I've spent over hours on TikTok in one sitting, but I'm not going to lie, I have done that, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And it's like the automated videos that'll pop up, and it's like, have you been scrolling again? Blah, 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 blah. And I don't even know what the rest of the video says because I'm like, oh, that's annoying, she's here again, and I scroll past it. Even though these apps intentionally put these practices in place to keep us scrolling and scrolling, TikTok at least, quote unquote, tries to get you to stop. They at least interject you and bring you back to reality and be like, oh, have you been scrolling again? But we are so addicted, and I'm so addicted, that when she pops up to tell me I've been on TikTok for an hour, if not more, I scroll past it because I'm like, why are you interrupting my scrolling time? It's so unreal how our brains just love that quick fix of dopamine or whatever neurotransmitters are affected by this like constant stream of things we want to see and short attention span things. And I've definitely noticed, at least within myself, that my attention span has gone severely down to a point where I've almost been concerned that I have ADHD at times, which I have never in my life, like growing up, going out through school, things like that. I never had issues with attention. Well, as far as I knew. I was always a fidgety kid, but I think that's more the anxiety. But I've never had issues genuinely focusing or staying on task until this like recent probably 3 to 5 years when I've just been so entranced in social media that I'm so used to my attention span only having to be 15 seconds to 3 minutes at the very longest. And it scares me that I'm saying this because I grew up in a time before we had this. And people older than me absolutely have grown up in a time without this because they were even older before they started getting inundated with all the social media and things. But I know what it was like before, and I know what the other side feels like, and I know what it's like to go throughout my day without it. I don't quite remember how to function that way because I've been surrounded by the social media in every aspect of life for so long now that I forgot how to function in that way, but I do remember what it was like when I did and before we had these addictions. So it scares me that these younger generations, they don't know a time before this. And I worry because obviously at some point, like I want to become a parent and I want to have my own kids. And there's like a battle in my mind of I want my kids to fit in and follow society and be well prepared and be skilled and talented at all the things that the world has to offer around them. Like, I'm glad that I'm very articulate in technology because I literally grew up with it. I grew up as technology was developing, so I became really smart in how to use it and all the tips and tricks on how to like take full advantage of our devices. And I'm glad that I know that, but I also worry that there's gonna be a time when these kids or like the future generations and the future adults of our society don't know anything else. And they're so dependent on technology and they're so addicted that they don't know how to, function as a normal human being. And it's really scary. Like, the basics of human connection that smartphones were originally intended to fulfill for us, they were kind of made to enhance our human connection and keep us more connected than ever before and keep us more in touch with each other than ever before, because now we can talk to people when they're thousands of miles away and we can see their face on the screen and it's almost like they're here in person. But because of just the way it's evolved and the way our society functions now, it almost replaces that normal human connection. We almost spend more time talking to people through our phones and seeing people's lives through the internet than we do actually sharing those moments with those people. And it's so scary. And I'm absolutely on a tangent right now, but it's something that it's not going to slow down. It's really, we're never going to go back to that place before where we just woke up in the morning, there wasn't a phone laying under our pillow or on our nightstand, and where we could just go about our morning uninterrupted, listening to some music, hearing the updates from the radio, but not surrounded by updates we don't need. The biggest source of gratification we got back in those days was really just through experiencing moments and our natural adrenaline and our response to things in our society. It wasn't fueled by curated content on screens that we're just surrounded by. So it's really interesting, and I will refer you to an episode that I listened to on the podcast called The Psychology of Your 20s. And I don't remember exactly what the episode was called, but I believe it was something around social media or phone addiction. And this podcast is nice because she talks about what's actually going on in your brain when you're having these experiences throughout your 20s, and it's really, really cool. I take a lot of inspiration from just listening to those episodes. But if you want to deep dive on what's actually happening in our brain and why we are kind of helpless when it comes to the whole social media and technology takeover, highly encourage you to go over to her page and check that out, because it was a really, really good and informative episode. And like I said, I couldn't tell you any of the actual information or the specifics on like the biology that's going on in our brains, but I do know that it's not our fault, but we really, really do need to be aware of this issue. Because like I said, when I checked my screen time, it was actually terrifying for me. Like, I felt so uncomfortable and kind of like ashamed of myself that I was spending so much time on the internet or just on my phone in general. And I didn't even realize that. Like, my life felt like it was functioning normally. I felt like I was spending plenty of time with my friends. I felt like I was being productive. But then when I look at that, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm wasting so many days out of the year, so much time in my life doing nothing. Like, sure, I may be gathering inspiration 1 out of 10 times when I see an Instagram post, or sure, maybe I'm learning a new life skill 1 out of 10 times when I see a TikTok video, but other than that, we're just flooded with so much information that we're not used to consuming at all at one time. Like, imagine if you could just wake up in the morning and not care what people were going to think about your day. I feel like I can't even do that anymore because everyone is sharing so much of their lives, even if it's curated and even if it's fake, that I feel like I have to share what I'm doing. And I think this is just genuinely symptoms of the addiction that I have to the social media and to the phone. And it's not my fault, and it's not your fault, and it's really not our faults, like I've said. But now that I've gained this awareness of my issue and of how much time and perspective that I'm spending of my life on this little rectangle screen in front of my face, it really put a lot into perspective for me. And I think about it too. There's on social media, of course I'm going to pull from trends on social media when I'm talking about it, because how ironic is that, right? It's giving Black Mirror energy, but if you think about it, people on social media, there's like the trend with the Stanley cups and the girls getting accessories for their Stanleys and like carrying it around like it's a purse or like it's a child. And it's this whole meme where people make fun of girls for putting accessories and things on their Stanley cups. And I was thinking about this example because I was like, we are no different when it comes to our phones. Like, there's literally those pop sockets or like the magnetic rings that people are putting on the back of their phone because we spend so much time holding this device that it's literally deforming our pinkies. Like, they call it iPhone pinky because the little joint on whatever hand you hold your phone with, right above the knuckle, there's like many people, if you look, you have an indentation because of holding your phone so much. We're literally changing the anatomy of our bodies because of our phone addictions. People have those adhesive wallets on the back of their phone. Like, you can't just simply carry a wallet anymore. It's more assumed that you will have your iPhone on you than you would be to have an actual wallet on you. So they're making these little like adhesive wallets that go on the back of the phones. And that's nothing new, but I'm just saying, like, it's funny to see people making fun of girls for carrying around a 32-ounce water bottle that's actually, hydrating them and good for their body, and giving people shit over accessorizing their water bottle that's with them all the time when we do the same thing for our iPhone addiction. So many of us, when we do the pocket check, we are more likely to remember our phone than we are to remember our own keys or our own wallet. Like, it's crazy. We are so connected to these things. And it's just so eye-opening. Even the name of this podcast, I talked about when I first introduced the pod that Potench is a Gen Z-ified shortened form of the word potential, which even the nature of like how Potench and, for example, like for situation, like calling it sitch, that all originated from the culture, like the texting culture of the 3-click texting keyboards when it was the number pad only and each one had 3 to 4 letters on it, and you would like triple click for C, like single click for A, and that's how you would text. These shortened forms of words is kind of like a funny Gen Z play on that whole thing. It's like shortening the word because it's easier to say, quicker to say, shorter to type, and all that. So just the irony of me having literally in the title of my podcast, Greatest Potench, our culture is so based around this online stuff that it's just inescapable. Like, we don't even realize how many parts of our lives are so affected by it. And we could have a whole nother episode about like the mental health effects of social media and how it kind of skews the way that we function and act as humans, just because we're so surrounded by what everyone else is doing at all times. And we were never really intended to consume this much information at one time. Our brains weren't ancestrally designed to like process all this information so quickly. So like, it's changing us physically, it's changing us psychologically. Clearly, a lot of us have issues with addiction to this, but I don't want to leave us out completely hopeless. So I'm going to really, really quickly just lead you through some of the things that I plan to do to combat my really, really serious issue with spending too much time on my phone and on social media. And I'm going to pass this message on to like the people close to me in my life. And if you're listening to this, I encourage you to analyze your own social media or phone usage and just think about it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to change anything in your life. But I do want you to at least check and be aware of how much time in your life you're genuinely spending on the phone. Because even if you don't think you want to change anything and you're super happy with the time that you're spending on it now, I feel like we deserve to know. And all of these social media companies, they don't want us to know that. They want us to stay addicted because it makes them money. They don't want to expose the reality of how disconnected we are from the real world and how connected we are to this curated online world. They don't want to tell us that. They don't want to give us the resources to move away from it because then they'll lose money. So we really need to do this work within ourselves and on our own, which is unfortunate. But I do want to share with you some of the tools and practices that I'm going to be taking to hopefully move myself back away from the severity of my addiction and hopefully towards a more real life, really lived experience rather than a curated one. So the first thing I did was I got rid of all my app limits on my settings. So again, all of this in referring to the iPhone. I don't know about the other phone models, but for the iPhone, there's measures that you can put in place that will restrict your time that you're allowed to be on certain apps. And so I had these in place. I had kind of dramatically long time limits for my apps. And guess what? I would still blow through them. I think I had a 3-hour time limit for Instagram, a 1-hour time limit for TikTok. I think I had a collective 1-hour time limit for like Facebook, LinkedIn, and Reddit or something like that. And then I just had like other little time limits here and there. And I'm not even lying, almost every single day, I would get the screen time notification where it's like your time on Instagram today has run out. And 100% of the time, I'm not even lying, 100% of the time, I would ignore that notification and I would keep scrolling. And I would spend more and more time on social media. So that is my first habit that I absolutely wanted to kick. So I deleted my old time limits and I made realistic, sturdy time limits that I actually want to stick to. So for example, for Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, I set a collective time limit for all 3 apps. So this can be used in any sort of split that I want, but between the 3 apps, I allocated myself 1 hour every day to them. So say I spend 50 minutes on Instagram, that only gives me 10 minutes to spend between both TikTok and Facebook. So if that makes sense. So I gave myself a 1 hour because those are my 3 most frequently scrolled apps, so I gave myself literally 1 singular hour every day that I'm allowing myself to scroll through them. I also set myself, because I know that if I actually stick to those time limits, I'm going to want to feed my addiction in another way, so I don't know where I would do that. Typically, I would probably go to like my shopping apps or my Reddit or things like that. So I put another time limit in place where all of my shopping apps, I set a collective 1 hour time limit as well, which again, I don't want to encourage myself to keep jumping through my apps and spending more and more time. But the reality of an addiction like this is, especially when it's been so hardwired into our brains and so normalized in society, is you have to take baby steps, and you can't do anything cold turkey because then you're just going to get pissed off and you probably won't stick to it. So I'm being real with myself and knowing that my addiction will not be fed by only 1 hour on all my social medias. I know that I'm going to need more phone time, especially at the beginning, to just kind of feel normal, and that's okay. So I gave myself an hour to spend on these shopping apps or like my Etsy or my Pinterest and things like that. And then I think I put one more in place. I couldn't tell you exactly what categories of apps it was, but it was just things that I felt like, okay, if I'm not allowed to get on my social medias and I'm not allowed to do my shoppings, this would probably be my last resort as an app. And I think I gave myself 30 minutes collectively between those apps. So that's not to say that my screen time is only going to be, say if I use the extent of each of these, that's not to say that my screen time is only going to be 2 hours and 30 minutes. It's just my mindless scrolling time will be maxed out at 2 hours and 30 minutes, which, like I said in the beginning, this example on Reddit said, even 3 hours on your phone a day, not even just on social media, equal out to 42 days of the year and 12% of your year. That is still a long time. So even though that's significantly reducing the time that I would have originally spent on social media and scrolling mindlessly, that's still a lot of time. But I think this is a really good first step for me. So that was one. I set these time limits for myself on my phone, and I really, really, really want to stick to them. I don't want to snooze or ignore this notification anymore, because the reason I have it there is for a reason. Clearly, I am aware of the issue and I want to spend less time on my phone and more time living real life. And I can't keep ignoring that. I can't disrespect myself like that. So, gonna hold myself to it. On that note, another step that I took was reaching out to Sam, my boyfriend, about this. And it sounds dramatic, and I know I keep saying the word addiction, and I know that technically, like, you can't really prove that you're addicted to something like a behavior like this. I mean, it's easy to prove, like, if you're addicted to a substance, like, there's clearly things going on in your brain that require that substance, and it's like you will have withdrawal symptoms and things like that. But with a behavior, it's a little bit harder to measure, but I really do fully feel like I am addicted, because there's times where I will grab my phone before I like take care of my body needs. Like sometimes I'll keep watching a video rather than going to the bathroom, even if I have to really bad. Like it is a problem. So anyways, I do keep using the terminology addiction because I truly feel that this is an addiction. Anyways, so I reached out to Sam and I told him, hey, by the way, I just wanted to be so real with you. I think I'm massively addicted to my phone. And I shared with him all the metrics that I shared with you in terms of like the screen time, that Reddit post, and then compared to my screen time. And I was just telling him like this was a really shocking awakening for me to find out this information, and it scared me. And I really want to work on getting on my phone less. So I just reached out to him and I was like, I want you to hold me accountable to be better. And I'm not saying social media is bad, and I'm not saying phone time is bad, but I'm saying like I just wanted him to help me be accountable to be better. And his response was actually pretty shocking to me. He was saying he wanted to do the same, and he didn't realize how big of an issue that he had either until I sent him those metrics. And he's like, oh my God, like that's actually terrible. That's so much time. And he said that he wanted to do it with me. So I'm excited to just kind of have an accountability buddy in this. And even if everyone else in the world is just continuing life as usual, I'm glad that the person that I live with and spend the most of my time with is going to be kind of in it with me and wants to improve, wants to make this change together. So that was another one of my steps. I reached out to him and just kind of told him, hey, I'm acknowledging that I have this really big issue, and just, I don't need you to do anything different or act any different, but I just want you to support me and hold me accountable. So that was another thing that I did. And lastly, something I want to try, I don't know how effective it will be, but because this podcast is obviously on a social media platform, like I share all of my things through Instagram, I have my links to access the streaming feeds. It's on Spotify, like you have to be on your phone to listen to the podcast. But something I've done is on my podcast Instagram account, I've followed content creators and pages that will fuel me and hopefully motivate me to actually move away from my phone and move more into whether it's journaling, whether it's getting off my phone and just taking a rest, whether it's going to move, whether it's going to cook something different. I intentionally followed a lot of pages on the podcast Instagram account that will motivate me to live my quote unquote greatest potential, right? To live my best life. And when I do pick up my phone to scroll, I want to try and log into specifically the podcast Instagram so that the content that I'm consuming is going to be actually really beneficial to my life and it's not going to be distracting or mindless or just like memes or things like that. So I don't know if that'll actually end up working because obviously I want to see what my friends are up to on my main page and I don't want to miss any like special announcements or things from, the creators I follow or the communities I'm involved in that share a lot of their information through Instagram. So I'm obviously going to spend a lot of time still scrolling on my personal page, but if I get stuck or I feel like I really need that just like fix of social media scrolling, I want to try to be intentional about switching to the podcast Instagram so that I can at least consume like positive media that I'm choosing to consume, right? Like, I think the difference is I follow probably almost 1,000 people on my personal page and I follow like 50 on the podcast page. So it's like very selective and intentional about who I followed. So that'll be another one that I try to do. Like I said, don't know how effective that one will be, but I surely want to just give it a try and see how it goes. And then lastly, I would say just this episode is a really good example of me trying to be conscious and intentional about just spreading awareness about the reality of our social media that we live in. And I know a lot of people in my life, we talked about this kind of over the weekend and throughout the week, and people have like tried. We've all tried to go on a social media cleanse. We've all tried to delete Instagram, and we've all tried to delete and just remove ourselves from it. And it's always so temporary. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, our society is just so ingrained in all this stuff. It's hard to remove yourself completely, because then you feel behind and you feel left out. And obviously, as humans, we have so much more potential than just sitting on a screen consuming everyone else's lives. But if that's the way that the world is going to go and that's the way that society is heading, I guess we do have to be prepared for it, right? So we can't completely eliminate it all, but just being really mindful about why am I picking up my phone to scroll? Is it because I actually genuinely want to gain information from something, or is it because I'm addicted? So I don't want to be harsh, I don't want to be negative, but that's the reality for probably most of us. I would say more of us are addicted than aren't addicted. So it's hard to hear, and especially when you see your own trends, it can be really hard to see, but think about how much fun we have when we're in those disconnected situations, and think about how good the human connection feels and just socializing in person, and think about how good it feels to just like go swimming and jump in a lake or run around. And even if you can't physically do those things, like think about something that just fills your body up with that good chemical, like that serotonin, that dopamine. And I don't want you to think about anything on your phone either. Maybe you win a really fun game that you're doing at game night, or when you get a really good night of sleep and you just wake up and you feel so refreshed. If you are struggling with the phone addiction and the social media addiction, something that I think really, really motivated me to take that step and to actually start being intentional about cutting back on this problem is remembering all the good moments and remembering how good I felt naturally when I was doing the things that didn't involve my phone. So if you need some motivation, that's kind of like my word of advice. Just think about the moments in life that give you that really good feeling, but don't tie you down to a device. Because if you think about it, who would have ever thought that we would have the entire internet and all these tools and tech within a little rectangle in our fingertips? Like, I imagine if you ask your parents or your grandparents about this, they would say never in a billion years did we ever imagine we'd see a world like this. So I just wanted to call that out, and I'm being realistic in saying that I know that I will never be able to completely escape technology, and I don't want to. I think it does great things, and I think our society has, like I said, developed exponentially since we've had these things. But in reality, there's going to become a time when it's really, really hard to tell real life from curated life. And just as a call out and as a service to myself in terms of finding my greatest potential and living my most fulfilling life as a human, I think that there is a lot in this world that can't be replicated virtually, and that we need the authentic experiences in order to feel fulfilled, honestly. And so, yes, it's scary, and yes, there's nothing we can do at this point because the tech companies are going to do what they want. But the most important thing I can say is just be real with yourself. Like, if you feel called to step away from technology, kind of like I'm feeling right now, do it. Because at the end of the day, yeah, the tech companies can do what they want, and yeah, society can shift into the way that it wants, but your human experience is so much more important than anything these tech companies want you to think, or anything these influencers want you to feel, or any product that you could be pushed to buy. Your human experience and your instincts and your natural behaviors come first in every single situation. So I hope that you don't feel too depressed or too scared or too existential after listening to this episode, but I just wanted to call out this topic. It's so relevant and so important to me, and it's present in all of our lives, and it's something that we can't escape, but we can do our best to change our behaviors and change our habits surrounding it. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I also hope that I haven't frightened you too much from ever coming back to listen to more episodes. Not everything is always this deep, I promise, but I really thought this was an important message to get across, so that's why we're here today, and that's why we're talking about this topic. So for once, I'm actually going to say I hope that you don't let me know what you thought about this episode. I would really encourage you to step away, sit with this message internally, and maybe share it with the people in your life, but I don't need a social media reaction to this. I don't want you to, curate a post or craft a message that's going to tell me how you feel. I want you to just sit there and feel with your human emotions. Just sit with it, process it, and think about it. And think about if it applies to your life at all or what that maybe looks like in your own life. And I hope you just walk away feeling a little bit more equipped and less alone in terms of the constant battle we have with social media, because it's not your fault. You're just living the experience that's kind of being given to you. And the best we can do is control how we receive that information, right? So it was a bit of a long one today, but definitely an important one. So I'll give your ears and your brain a break, and I'll let you get back to your day. But thank you so much for being here with me. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.